Hello out there. This is Pamela Fagan Hutchins, and you are with us on Wine, Women, and Writing, or maybe today I should call it Mescal, Men, and Mystery, as my guest is not a woman, although his protagonist that we're going to talk about is. This is the show where I do tend to focus, not to be a sexist, but I tend to focus on the female characters that are authentic, complex, and catch my attention, and do it with whatever strikes our fancy. Today, I think I will drink from a Boston Terrier mug and sip a little bit of green tea instead of wine. And it looks like my guest is having a nice mocha. And I will try not to be too irreverent, share too much personal information, or cuss too much, although I'm not going to make any promises. So if you are looking for the more of this show, past guests, upcoming guests, you want to read along with the books that are essentially going to be part of Pamela's personal book club, please go out to my website, PamelaFaganHutchins.com, where it would not hurt my feelings at all if you also checked out my USA Today best-selling and Silver Falchion winning best mystery series, What Doesn't Kill You, and the novels there. So run the table on those while you're at it. Like I said, feelings not hurt. So let's get on to the good stuff. Or as I should say, enough about me. Let's talk about our guest. I am welcoming today in his words, schizophrenic author, and by that I mean writes a lot of genres, J.B. Jamison, John, and the second novel in his Emily Graham adventure series, Distraction. John, welcome to the show.
Pamela, thank you very much. And I grew up in a towboat family, so if the language goes directions like that, don't worry about it. I'm familiar with towboat slang.
I try really, really hard. My mom has made me promise not to use foul language in my books, and I do my best, and she watches the show, but it just slips out thanks to the influence of my dad occasionally.
I understand. We may have to talk about language in a certain review I got a few months ago. That's for later.
I want to hear that for sure. So you guys, John, JB, as he publishes his adult mysteries is coming to us from stormy Illinois today, I hear.
Yeah, well, hopefully not today. We've had enough. We've had tornadoes and hail and wind and all that. Today, it looks very, very nice, but it's still early in the day. Who knows? It's central Illinois. Give me 5 minutes. It'll change.
You know, it's fitting as we're talking about an adventure book where on any given day, anything can and does go wrong, right? Although it's not the weather that you have to worry about, but the bad guys. So I want to hear about every iteration of your writing journey, but let's start with the adult fiction and the reason that we're here, and that is your Emily Graham series. So for readers that haven't dove into it, how do you conjugate that verb?
Jumped.
That haven't jumped into your series yet. Tell us a bit about the series, and then we'll segue over to Distraction.
Absolutely. The Emily Graham series did not start out to be the Emily Graham series. I was not even aware of Emily Graham until chapter 20 of the first book I was writing. Emily popped in and took over. I've always wanted to write. I've written work stuff through the years, but always wanted to write my stuff. And we've talked about that. But it just fine. And I've always wanted to. I had an idea 35, 40 years ago. My father was a riverboat captain. I grew up in a towboat family. All my cousins, uncles, everybody worked on the river. It was just always there. And I got an idea 35 years ago about a story about a boat. And I told my dad that story, and he looked at me and said, "That's the dumbest damn thing I've heard in my life. Forget it." So I forgot about it. 4 years ago now, the last conversation Dad and I had before he died, he'd gotten very sick. He'd gone into dementia. We hadn't had a real conversation for months. We were getting ready to send him to Dallas to visit my sister. She found a nice place for him to go. Dad and I were sitting in the car at the airport waiting for the plane, and he turned and looked at me and he said, "You remember that story you told me a long time ago?" And he was back. It was amazing. I said, "Yeah." He said, "That scared the hell out of me. That could really happen. I just didn't want to think about it while I was still out there. You ought to write that down."
Oh my
So
gosh.
I put him on the plane. I went home. All I knew at that point was the idea that a Mississippi riverboat gets hijacked. That's all I knew. So I sat down and just started writing. And I got to a point to where a good guy had to show up. I didn't know. I just started writing and I said, and the door opened and she said, and I said, she, who's she? And Emily Graham shows up. And that I got through the story and I'm sitting here going, wow, Emily reveals herself as she chooses. I love her dearly, but she's in charge. I got to the end of the first book and figured I actually wrote a book. I did it. I'm done. And Emily said, oh, no. I've got an idea. And that led to Distraction. The first one was Disruption. That led to Distraction, which you've read. I got it finished and said, I've written 2 stories. Wow. And Emily said, that led to Disbelief, which came out this spring. And now she's yelling at me and haunting me about Discontinue, which is the 4th. That's in the works. And so that's where it all came from. And Emily and the characters drive the whole thing. It's been a heck of an adventure.
I'm so glad that you listened to Emily and kept going, and that you had that moment with your dad. That's super, super special and so funny that his reaction long ago covered up what his internal real reaction was when the truth serum came out later, which is, I'm a river guy. I don't want to think about it.
A riverboat captain is always in control. Whether he's on the boat or at home, the family or anywhere, the riverboat captain always knows the answer. His answer is always the correct answer. If it turns out being the wrong answer, it's because someone interpreted it wrong. And they're never afraid. And you're right, the dementia truth serum.
Yeah.
The sad part, so that was about an 18-second conversation, and it's the last one we had. He went to Texas. We talked on the phone a few times, but he was back on the boats and stuff. And 3 weeks later, he was gone. I mean, was on his terms. Yeah. But yeah, I look back and just go, thanks, Dad. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways, Emily's a little bit of a product of that. The way she comes in, hijacks, and you don't get to tell her; she tells you, and she's kind of asserted herself in a very, captainish sort of way in your writing.
And it was never a conscious thing. I think it's just we write what we know. As we learn in the first book, and we hear in the second, Emily's dad was a riverboat captain. Yeah. And she grew up in that environment. I know a lot of women who grew up in that environment. My sister is one, and I haven't modeled Emily, period. Emily consciously. Mm-hmm. It's not my sister, it's not this person, but raised a riverboat family, you're raised to be damned independent. You're raised to do the right thing. Don't put up with nonsense. Always be ready to change because things change constantly. It's just that's the wiring inside that guides everything. And that's what drives it, I think.
I cannot tell you right now how excited I am that your publicist contacted me and I read this book and that you're telling me this now because, sometimes people will say, well, I don't know why that character popped in and it's something somewhat random. It happens to me. It happens to all of us. Some of our characters aren't planned, but it seems as if Emily had been growing her seeds inside of you for many, many years. For her to show up like that and yet be so true to what it was that you have grown up and experienced. So no wonder she shows up as a real and complete woman in the book.
Yeah, the voice has always been there. My mother was a very strong-willed individual. A riverboat captain is home 30 days and then gone 30 days. So she was captain when he was gone. So very strong-willed. When he was home, there were 2 captains, which is not a good thing. So I really witnessed that kind of tension type stuff, experienced that. And it's always been that voice in my head that just says, whatever job I've done, whatever role it's, don't put up with, are you going to buy this? What they're saying, you got to say something. And that's Emily. It's always been there.
So with respect to Distraction, one of the things that struck me, especially from the little I knew about your background prior to this conversation, was the technology and the science behind putting together distraction was impressive. I have a daughter that's a PhD in computer science. And so I kept thinking as I read it that I don't understand what she does. I mean, let's just the slightest freaking clue what she does, but I know she's really smart. Nicole, you're awesome. But what was striking me was that you made it where I could understand it.
Oh, good.
Plausible, and plausible to me as a reader. You could have been right, you could have been wrong, that any of this stuff was possible. I would never know, but I was able to buy into it. And for you guys, the book starts out with a really exciting scene at a baseball stadium where a terrorist is making people's pacemakers kill them, basically, in their chests. And so 13 or so people in this stadium suddenly are stricken down with not enough paramedics to go around. And that's the beginning of what happens. And so it really grabbed me, your grasp of the technology. Where does that come from?
It's a couple of things. I have played with computers for years. I got my first computer back like 1983. It was one of the early ones. I was just fascinated. I'm not a techie. I'm not, as your daughter, that stuff I don't know. But I've always been fascinated by the ability those things have, especially now with all the wirelessness and the interconnectivity of stuff. So, and I worked in education for many years, dealing with educational technology and seeing the dangers and the potentials and stuff. But I have a lot of friends who are into it. So the book includes several different scenarios about hacking. And I really appreciate what you said, because my biggest concern is, can I explain this stuff in a way that people aren't going to go, what? So thank you for what you've said. But the key thing is every situation in the book, beginning with the pacemaker and diabetes pumps, everything in the book, from that to the ultimate thing, every one of those is plausible. Every one of those things has either been proven to be doable or has actually been done.
And it's terrifying to think of.
It
to
is.
me, that's like micro-terrorism. Instead of killing everybody, let's just show how vulnerable you are at your weakest, when you're putting your care in the hands of others, a machine, basically, something that can be controlled.
Absolutely. And to go serious on you here for a second, I really think that's a big part of why Emily is doing all of this. The first book was the same thing, about the real risks that riverboats face. And in doing the first book, I talked with companies, riverboat companies. I talked with Coast Guard, with all these folks about these things. And the risks are there. We don't talk about them. Mm-hmm. And the second book, dealing with the hacking, those are all very real, and not just the app thing to turn off pacemakers. I had a guy show me where I could download that for my cell phone. I mean, it's there on that supposed dark web. Those things are there. And everything in there, does exist. The third book goes a little another direction, but they all come back to this. Hey, folks, are we paying attention? Emily is kind of saying, you're all talking about this stuff in the news and all this. These are all distractions. Mm-hmm. All of this is distracting. That's kind of, I think, what Emily has been hounding me about with all of these.
Yeah. Well, it was extremely well done. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And so that brings me back to, you took off and started writing really what I would classify, at least from having read Distraction, as thrillers. But your prior writing had been academic publications, kids' books. How did you just instinctively feel thriller, know how to deliver a thriller? Did you take a class? Did you study by reading a lot as you through your life? How did you come out knowing how to deliver a thriller?
I've never taken an actual course on any of this. Part of it, again, goes back growing up, and I grew up in the line I use a lot. I grew up in a family of storytellers and liars. I spent most of my time as a kid trying to figure out which was which. I mean, stories have always been there.
Yeah.
My grandfathers were storytellers. My great-grandfathers that I recall were storytellers. My uncles were all storytellers. And so, the idea of what's a good story, that's just kind of hardwired in over all the years. I spent the first 20 some years of my career as a minister, as a United Methodist minister. And most of my time was done with counseling, but I also had to preach. And it only took me about 6 months to get very bored with listening to me preach.
Yeah.
I'd gone to seminary, learned how to do a good 3-point sermon, all that. And oh my God, I got so bored. I had churches where I may have had to preach 3 or 4 times a week. And I'm going, yeah. So one day I just decided I'm just going to tell stories. So
Yeah.
I started going to the scriptures and just telling stories to keep me awake. And that worked. And it took me in a lot of places. And it's just all, when I write curriculum, I do a thing I call story-driven learning. And it's not that I use stories, but I build a course so the experience is like a story.
Right.
Everything to me comes back to that. And, somebody asked, how do you do this? I go, I don't know. I do. I can kind of break it down. What I try to do in the writing is, I'm not creating a story or writing a story. My goal is I'm seeing and hearing and experiencing this thing, and I'm trying to share that experience with you. So my focus is I want you to experience something, not just read it.
So I'm glad you brought up the United Methodist background. That was my church home.
Oh, yeah.
Child, little bitty church.
Yep.
And so, as I'm thinking about what makes a good written, verbal, however, learning experience, stories very much come to my mind. I've been a presenter a lot of my life,
Yeah.
a lot of live presentations, and it's always about the story, right? It's always about, because people dive into a story, even speaking, using dialogue as you're speaking, and instead of just telling the story, breaking into the character. My husband, we talked about this off the air. You guys all know that I'm lucky because I get the before and the after stuff, and you just get the stuff in the middle. So we've already been chatting. But my husband is a chemical engineer, and he gives a lot of presentations. And what he teaches all these other engineers, and they are hard to teach to give presentations, is find the story. Yes, it's about data. Yes, it's about the performance of, let's say, a refinery, but there's a story in there somewhere. Find the story and then deliver the story by telling stories, because people relate to stories. If you just talk about the numbers, or if you just think about the words or think about the sermon, you're going to lose everybody, but focus on the story. So
yeah, and the goal is whatever it is I'm creating or sharing, somehow I want to make sure that it connects with your life story.
right.
That if I can craft the greatest story in the world, but if it doesn't make sense in your world it's like the hacking thing. I could write a wonderfully technically savvy thing, but for someone who doesn't live in the world of technology, it would be, yeah. So yeah,
And this, sorry, you've seen my old shows, this is an interactive conversation. A lot of people come on thinking she's going to ask me a few questions, I'm going to talk the whole time. No. But I was speaking with a book club last night, and I was trying to explain what it is about characters that to me make them authentic. And it's that we react to them. We either want to get involved in their story or we don't want to get involved in their story. So whatever we can do to bring authenticity to that character and giving them the depth a real human would, so that we can care about them, so that their story, has a voice, is what makes a book readable or not. And so your ability to present Emily as somebody that we cared about and that could tell a story that interested us is the difference between a lot of books that I read and a lot of books that I close. And kudos to you, because it is hard to write somebody that is different from us in whatever way at the same time as the same from us. But a lot of times people are tripped up by the differences. And I didn't read the book thinking a guy wrote this. I read Emily's story.
Oh, that's good to hear. I've gotten comments before, folks who have not read it, is what makes you think a man can write a female character? You can't, they're never any good. And I get told that a lot until they read the book.
And
Yeah, which
that's not fair to any author, right? Because if you're going to write a whole book, you've got to write a whole world of people, and they have to be different from each other. So this is a challenge. And by the way, I hats off to Robert Dugoni, who I've had on this show, who writes a whole series with a female detective. Men can write women's voices, women can write men's voices. The people that do it well probably do the other gender as well too, and probably do someone that's of a different race or a different religion from them well too. It's about caring enough to present an authentic character, to research them, to listen to their voice. So anyway, sermon over. Now you.
I think for me, whatever gender, I mean, I write male characters, female characters. I write a Squirtlock character for the kids, which is,
Yeah.
I don't know what the heck it is. To me, there's a reality in there, the things that make it real, regardless of the external.
Right.
And that, Emily, like my others, Emily has flaws. She's dealing with issues, personal issues that, are changing, and she's very real, just like we are. So that really helps. She mumbles to herself, just like we do. I mean, dialogue is a big piece of it. Sorry.
Do you think that your experience as a pastor created in you or nurtured in you what might have been a pre-existing empathy and listening ear to the differences in people?
Oh, there's several things. The first thing I think is my mother always wanted a girl instead of a boy. And was never really happy with it until I was in junior high and my baby sister came along. Now that's traumatic for a 7th grade boy, trust me.
Yeah.
But she finally got her daughter. Up to that point, there was always this thing of dad worried because when he was gone, mom was taking me to art things and all that. Dad would bring me home, drag me hunting, because there was this. So I grew up in that, kind of really aware of the difference. I spent 20 some years as a pastoral counselor, listening and paying attention. Working in the church, which still in most cases, other than conservative side, is female led in a lot of female leadership, strong people. Same in education. I've always just kind of watched and listened, and I'm intrigued by people just because of the counseling stuff.
Yeah.
So there's lots of reasons.
Well, it is, I think, the big differentiating factor, besides, of course, some people are driven to write and express themselves well in the written word, but the other is how much empathy and ability to listen do you have that'll show in your characters. So it is endlessly fascinating to me. Now, to totally change gears, I'm seeing some guitars behind you. And there must be some secret side to John Jamison that's not so secret because they're right on camera with us. Musician?
Amateur now. When I was in 6th grade, getting ready to go to junior high, the guy from the high school band came trying to recruit us, and I wanted to play trombone because it was cool. My dad said that's too expensive. My grandpa had a used guitar, and he said, "Why don't you try this?" I went, "I don't want to play guitar." The next week on Sunday night, the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan. Now, I did not see that, but the next morning I went to school and all the girls were talking about were these long-haired guys playing guitar. And I went, "Guitar? I got one of those." That's when the guitar really started. My mother immediately decided he can't play, but the Beatles are big. So she went out and bought Beatle wigs. And she and another woman got their kids and me, and we became the Fleas. They dressed us like the Beatles. We lip synced to 3 Beatles songs. Actually, my memory is foggy, but back when Dolly Parton was still running around with Porter Wagoner years ago, playing the small towns, they played in my hometown, and we were one of the opening acts, which...
Wow.
And
you're still lip syncing at this point?
Still lip syncing. The bass drum was a big round circle cut out of paper. My guitar had no strings and I had to hold it left-handed because that's how Paul did it. I'm right-handed. But from there, I did learn. I started, 3 or 4 rock bands all through high school. Through college, I did the coffee house circuit, all that kind of stuff. Now I just plunk and play and occasionally get together and do that. But yeah, it's just there. It's part of.
from your Tom Sawyer upbringing to your rock star youth, huh?
Yeah.
Well, it's a shame you don't live closer, because my husband and I are looking for a lead guitarist. We need a drummer too, but our band is going to be called Springfield Crusher. He's always wanted a band named this,
Cool.
and he's been in bands all his life. But I'm allowed to join this next one, keyboards and vocals. So,
What kind of music?
Pretty much rock. He
Okay.
grew up. He's a child growing up in the 70s. So he wanted to be a rock musician, and was, until he was 35, and it was no longer compatible with his engineering career. So anyway, if you're ever in Wyoming, jam with us.
It might be worth a trip out. Absolutely.
Might be. So now your children's books, this illustration behind you with the ears, the lovely ears. Is this the creature that you were talking about earlier that you write about?
This is the squirdlock, and the squirdlock has the 39-year history too. When our daughter was 1 or 2, we were sitting up 2 o'clock in the morning in the rocking chair. She was sick, feeling miserable. I started humming some song, made up the words to this. Oh, I wish I had a squirdlock, a funny looking dog, ears like an elephant, nose like a hog. And it went on and on. That became the running joke in our family. Anytime somebody did something dumb, oh, you squirdlock. Well, about the same time I started writing the first Emily book, my granddaughter heard her mother say something about the squirdlock. And my granddaughter said, so what does the squirdlock look like anyway? So I had never drawn it. So we got a piece of paper and said, well, see, ears like an elephant. And I drew ears, nose like a hog. And we got this thing done, looked at it, and the squirdlock looked up and said, what, no shoes? So we added shoes, and it said no color. So then my granddaughter ran and grabbed her paints. We painted it and stuff. And the squirdlock said, okay, you're going to write my book now or what? And the squirdlock, very similar to Emily, Grant takes charge. It is that similar kind of voice. Imagine anything, dream anything, try anything. There's no moral to the story. There's no lessons to be learned. Kids get enough of that. Those are good books. I've watched my grandkids go to school and they read, but everything they read now, it's to make sure they get their name in the box for the pizza party. My children's books are just excuses to curl up on the sofa together and laugh and enjoy time. And that's where the squirdlock came from.
So you were like the fun grandpa.
Oh, there are times, I've been told. Other times, well, maybe not. I'm the storyteller.
And I hope you guys noticed that in telling this story, not only did he tell a story, but he used the characters speaking in dialogue. I had a feeling that when you launched, that would happen.
My character, it goes back that I don't create my characters consciously. I mean, it's all in there, I know, but they run the thing. It's an adventure. It's everything I write is a discovery for me. I tried James Patterson's idea of outlining everything ahead of time. No, it doesn't work for me.
For you.
Fine if it works, but for me, I have an idea, but I wait and my characters tell me where we're going.
So with your Emily Graham, you're hard at work on what did you say?
Discontinue.
Discontinue.
Unless she changes that.
Yeah, unless she changes that. And I'm assuming you have no idea whether there will be a 5th, because she hasn't told you yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I try not to think about it. And seriously, I think that may be part of all of this too. And if people ask me, how do you write? What do you think ahead about your books? I try not to consciously think. I want to be invisible. I don't want you reading that thinking John wrote this.
Right.
I don't want. So I try to leave that out and see where it goes. Unless I'm guessing there will be another one, knowing Emily, if she gets through this one. That seems to be a question right now. She may get in this one and go, I'm done with this. Yeah.
She might. She might. Well, and I love what you're saying about trying to take yourself out of the writing. I find that I'm on a pretty aggressive writing schedule. And so what will happen is I'll go through days at a time where I'm drafting, where I feel like I'm forcing it. Yeah. But in order for the book ever to become, I have to step back and quit thinking about it
Yeah.
and live in the character and the story for a while until I feel more like that character than I feel like me. And
Yeah.
it's just, isn't that the most beautiful magic when the character starts taking over?
You know, it really is. And for me, it solves a lot of issues. I have since I've really started, I've never experienced what I'd call writer's block, which is kind of when I need to write, but I don't know what to write. I don't worry about knowing what to write. There are times that I'll sit down and things are, all that means to me is Emily's still processing, or the squirt lock is. And when that happens, I don't stress about it. I'll do something like, I'm going to go to town, go to the coffee shop, and I'm going to go as Emily.
Yeah.
And I'll go there, and in my mind, I'm Emily Graham, and I'm standing waiting in line, and Emily Graham's not good at standing waiting in line. So I experience it. I don't say things out loud.
I was going to say, does this affect the purse you carry with your shoes, or does it
I stay up here. There's the other
outwardly,
thing.
your jaw?
Outwardly. And the interesting thing, I don't know what Emily looks like.
Yeah.
Being told, I have no idea. One of the early reviews, a woman in Scotland, of all places, Dublin, Ireland, said she loved the book. This was the first book. Her one criticism was, I didn't give enough description of the character. She didn't know and I didn't tell her what Emily looked like. She and I talked, and I said, I'll bet you can tell me exactly what Emily Graham looks like. She says, well, yeah, she's a brunette. I go, there you go. I didn't have to tell you. I want you to have the freedom to, I'll tell you Emily will tell you what needs to be told. She'll trust you to create the rest. So yeah.
I like that approach. Now, before we wrap it up, you teased us at the beginning with a review that I believe was a little, the language may have been questionable. So end us with that little nugget.
The first book, the one that about the hijacking, in the very first chapter, there is one sentence that is a true story that I heard when I was probably 7, which may not be appropriate for a 7-year-old to hear, but as a towboat kid, you heard all kinds of things. There's a little description of something that happened on a towboat, and the captain's going down, and this happened. He's remembering it, and it's not porn. I mean, it's not, it's not anything you would not hear, talking to somebody.
It's authentic for a towboat environment.
It's fully authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And a woman who was a pastor, apparently, had noticed that I used to be a pastor, and she got the first book, Disruption, and apparently started reading and came to that sentence. That's all the further she read. And she posted a 0-star review.
Wow.
And her whole review was, shame on you, John Jamison. Said nothing about the book, but how can a pastor use things, what kind of an image are you all, and just went on and on and on. And I rarely read reviews, rarely ever, but someone said, you ought to take a look at that. I rarely ever respond, but I looked at that and I just said, okay, this is not a book review. This is a sermonette.
Yeah.
With my respect. And that's the one time I actually sent a note to Amazon saying, would you please look at that and see if you really think that is a book review that should be there. If so, okay. But I did that really for all of the other authors who get those and maybe are afraid to say something.
It's interesting too, because you do not bill, and this is a pet peeve of mine that we're about to have Pamela launching again, but you don't bill your book as Christian fiction. You have a background as a pastor. It is the Emily Graham Adventures. Similarly, I write mysteries. Do not bill them as Christian fiction. I do say that most are PG-13, some are rated R, but I go for authenticity. And the world around me is an imperfect world, and I'm an imperfect person. Yep. But man, I get emails sometimes or reviews that are very angry because my characters do not live a life in line with Christian values.
Yeah.
So I blogged on this once because my assistant is a youth pastor's wife. And I asked her about it. I said, how offensive is this? How bad is it that I thought it just was real and reflective of like a towboat captain's story?
Yeah, exactly.
And she said, that's the thing that makes your characters lovable. So J.B. Jamison, John Jamison, that is the thing that makes your books authentic. Don't you listen to that mean lady.
And and that's why I use pseudonyms. The children's book is Pops Jamison.
Yeah.
So if you want a children's book, don't buy a JB.
Right.
I don't write adult porn. I write, and the book in Amazon Airplace, it meant 16 and over.
Yes.
It's clearly identified, but exactly. It's part of the thing. It's just part of it.
Exactly. Yeah. You got to grow a thick skin. And by the way, readers out there, JB in this case, and I appreciate your honest reviews more than we can say.
They mean a lot.
And I am even happy with your reviews that tell me my book stinks. But I do like the ones that say it's awesome better. It's just, human.
If you post a review telling me it stinks, tell me why. I really do want to know that, because maybe it does. I'm learning as we go.
Exactly. But if what you want is to quibble with me on theology or etc., just write me an email.
There you go.
I'll debate with you.
I can argue. I love to argue.
Well, JB, John, Pops, whatever name you're going by at any given moment, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a
Pamela, thank you for having me, and thank you for what you're doing. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And you guys should know that at this point of the show that I solemnly swear that I will include that this is a copyrighted production solely owned by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and I owe it all to the goddess producer, Pam Stack. We give it a big up here. As for the show, please go out to the website, as I mentioned earlier, PamelaFaganHutchins.com, and check out our upcoming shows so you can get those books in advance, read them, and then be meaningfully able to participate mentally with my conversations with the wonderful authors. And you can check out the past shows while you're there as well and binge read my books. But your assignment for this week, if you haven't already done it, is to pick up J.B. Jamison's Distraction and give it a read. I promise for those of you that like mystery, thriller, suspense, good adventure, that you're really going to enjoy it and be glad that you picked up a fresh voice that's new.
Let me recommend start with Disruption first, then Distraction. Either one is fine, but you'll enjoy it more.
And a good point to know here is that while I, as a purist, always feel like starting at the beginning is most enjoyable, you can still enjoyably read Distraction without feeling like you were ripped off and have to go back and get the first one. So thank you for doing that. Yeah. For the rest of you out there that have already read Disruption and have already read Distraction, then pick out the book for next week's guest, which you can get on my website. If you want to learn more about the books of J.B. Jamison, will you give us your website real quick, please, before we sign off?
JamisonBooks.com.
That's easy enough.
Yeah.
JAMISON books.com. So have a good week, you guys, and I'll check you next time. All right. And this is the part where I go, I can never remember how to stop my own show. Bye.